Reverend Dr. J.W. Morrison, theologist, New South Wales, Australia. Covert emotional incest. You'll meet people these days who are preying on victim mentality. Yes, at some point they've been a victim, but they're using their victim mentality to prey on people through it. They're claiming to be victims of this and victims of that, and it's probably true, but it's past tense and has no legitimacy for a draw on your emotional output. But this is how they're programming people and conditioning people to engage with them. They're actually predators. They don't realise this, but they are. They are usually promiscuous. They have a level of morality, but it doesn't hold with values. Their values are usually undermined by resentments. These people have no moral recalibration. They, say for instance, if they get resentment or bitterness towards somebody, they don't know how to delete that, and therefore their morality goes out and they become promiscuous to try and soothe or resolve the resentment within themselves. They don't resolve the issue, but they do resolve, or try to resolve, or think they're resolving the resentment in themselves, but they're not. They're actually building onto the dysfunctions and the traumas that they have via their way of thinking. Their way of thinking is, well, I've got resentment, that person's done this to me, or they're in a situation, sorry about the background noise, viewers, they're in a situation where they're required to bring resolve, but have a resistance towards it, and through that resistance it's instigating their sinful nature, and their sinful nature then is influencing them to go promiscuous, careless, as a way of solving the problem instead of facing the problem. And promiscuity always has an element of secrecy behind it. It has to, so that it can gratify the damage that's happening emotionally and psychologically to these people via lack of resolve. And they're using the victim mentality as a form of justification for their inability to resolve and being promiscuous, sabotaging the people that they're in relationships with. And this is rampant now. It's a common form of weakness in our communities. People are finding all sorts of excuses not to resolve themselves, particularly in the mental health arena. There's certain government organisations that are helping handicapped people that are just being milked beyond comprehension and misused. This isn't uncommon, but the issue that I'm trying to deal with is the disguise of being a victim. But these people aren't victims at all, and it's used as a form of influence to penetrate into the lives of people that look like they're going to be good supply for them. Good supply being somebody that they can have as a partner, but not as a partner, as a convenience for the way in which they navigate relationships. It's calculated. It's a behaviour that they've learnt from a younger age. It could be anywhere from teens right through. They've learnt this behaviour. They know how to use it to their advantage. They've not only caused destruction to themselves, but to destruction to their children and to the people around them, usually their marriage and people that have tagged on after their marriage. And the relationship will centre around the victimization of the person, and it's grandiose, it's pedestalized. It's the power that bonds these people together. In other words, while you're on board with this person, in playing the part of the victim, and you're more or less there just to uphold and reinforce that this is what they are, while being a suitor. That is, if you're a good supplier. These people will meet people, and use them for sex and drop them overnight if they're not a suitable suitor. They get dumped themselves all the time because there's a lot of people that won't tolerate victim mentality. And victim mentality will manifest. You will then become somebody that's causing part of the victimhood. You will be transitioned from a supporter to a perpetrator. That's just how it works. Once your job's done, and that's violating, demoralizing and humiliating, but this is how it works. It's all predictable. And the sense of confusion, the deep psychological bond that this can cause is very hard to break. The soul tie is very hard to break because you become, even though you're not aware of it, the antidote. You are subconsciously thinking that you have, or in some way are part of the antidote to this person's ohs and woes, but you're not. You're just feeding into and playing along with the victim mindset mentality, because this is how they get all their attention. And there's just no need for it, but this is how these people are made. And the reason for this is, once your use by date comes up and the devalues stage of the relationship starts, then you'll usually be blamed for, in some way, emotionally or psychologically injuring this person, which will give them another tick in the box for their victimhood, and then it just goes on and on and on and on. They actually become perpetual victims. And all they need is an empath or a super empath to come on board and try and heal all the wounds, all the psychological and emotional cuts and abrasions that have happened to these people as a consequence of their victimhood. That's how this works. So you need to be aware of these kinds of people, because they will come sometimes the children don't have the parents playing along with this, but if the parent's the victim, the children will take on this persona as well. Hey mate. They'll take on this persona as well, and it'll just be rancid. This is usually where covert emotional incest comes from. Exodus 11, this is what the Lord says: about midnight I will go throughout Egypt, and every firstborn son in the land of Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh who sits on his throne to the firstborn son of the servant girl behind the handmill, as well as the firstborn of all the cattle. And then a great cry came out over all the land of Egypt. Such an outcry has never been heard before and will never be heard again. And the funny and sad part, well, not the funny part, but the sad part about this is too many people have to be pulled down to the point where in covert emotional incest, where a family member has to be harmed or maimed before they do realise that their covert emotional incest has been an aggravation, an undermining and demoralising form of psychological and emotional assault and abuse to the person or people that have come into their lives. You see, the more these people get away with it, the more self-unaware they become with it. Covert emotional incest has a way of running out of sarcasm and egotism, and on several occasions I've seen one or the other, the parent or the adult child, go into covert emotional incest just out of the blue, and they'll come up behind the mother and cup her around the underneath of her breasts and put their nose around her neck, or the mother will say things to the son that are just sexually orientated or completely sarcastic and undermining towards people. And it's so ingrained because it's DNA, it's extra maternal. And you don't want to be offensive to these people. You don't, it takes a long time to really realise that this is what's going on, but it does. And unfortunately, as they lose more and more relationships, as they become more and more dependent on each other for excuses for their failures, the covert emotional incest partakers, as they become more dependent on substances and medications and alcohol and things to dilute the pain and their conscience, because they have a conscience of the damage that they're doing, because they lose good people. I mean, you could hand these people a golden egg for life and they'll go with the covert emotional incest. The covert emotional incest will sabotage it. It's just how this insidious bond works. And even after the parent or the child dies, there's this worship. And sometimes you really see it manifest after a death. There's this sullen worship that has to be carried out on a daily basis. They'll build shrines to these people as forms of devotion. They'll burn incense as a reminder to these people. This is the sort of thing that you should only do with God. You're bringing on yourself familiar spirits and things like this. It only adds to the destruction that covert emotional incest causes. And unfortunately, some people just can't let go. Really, when you think about it, a child's somebody you bring into the world that you're to train up, love and train up and nurture, inclusive of boundaries, and that you send out into the world to succeed. That's not happening for the most part these days because of this worship that comes with covert emotional incest, this element of worship, child, parent, worship. And of course, and sadly, it's not until somebody... See, what will happen is, say for instance, you're married to a man who was mummy's boy. And remember, it's not the normal parent to child relationship. This is extra maternal. It's gone way beyond that. That's why it's incestual. There's a dependence between these people that should not be there, that should never have been cultivated or allowed to even start, but it does. And if somebody, say for instance, let's say the father and it's a daughter, a lot of these daughters will bond to the father in a rescuing way if the mother leaves the father and she's left the father for another bloke, and she's moved in with the other man and the father's been abandoned. The daughter will come to the rescue of the father, despise the mother, and become the partner to the father, because a lot of these fathers that get abandoned usually for the first 3, 6, 9, 12 months are unable to get through the wounding successfully. They're very broken, they're very dismantled psychologically, they can turn to alcohol and medications and weed. A lot of these people are on weed. A lot of people are on weed now because it's been legalized. And the statistics as to the consequences of this are profound, but people justify it and they're just ruining themselves on it. And so the father turns to the daughter, and the daughter gets a sense of femininity out of rescuing the father as a surrogate partner. And they'll sit on the lounge together and lay together, and sometimes this doesn't change. Sometimes the daughter never leaves the father for a lifetime. It's quite strange, actually. And then in other cases the father will meet somebody else, and then the daughter and the father will become estranged because it causes a tremendous sense of abandonment. So while the daughters watch the mother abandon the father, now the father's abandoning the daughter. And so then you've got this daughter that's completely carrying abandonment trauma because she's copped it from both sides. And she's been betrayed herself. So then she starts to question, was mum right? Was dad wrong? How could he do this to me after all I've done for him? And dad's having sex with somebody else now, and it's all over. And then she has been undermined in her ability to find a man, because she's given all her attention to her father without a man, and that's left her infantile. And you'll meet these infantile women. A lot of them will have they'll be out of divorced marriages themselves, they'll have children, they never come out of their infantility. That's why they can't keep a marriage themselves. And this just goes on and on and on and on. I'm telling you, you have to have your wits about you. There is a victim mentality out there now that's being used as a predatory instrument to gain influence over people, to be a convenience for these that will not commit to a proper relationship. Reverend Dr. J.W. Morrison, bye for now.